So today we are joined by Hephzi. Hephzi, you are the founder and CEO of Equality Group. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Very
Joining
well.
us on another bright day. Thank God that the weather is being so kind to us, given the circumstances.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Good for our mental health, I think, all this sunshine.
Yeah, absolutely. God knows what it would have been like if this had started in October. Anyway,
Yeah.
very quickly, who are Equality Group?
So we're a specialist firm focused on inclusion and diversity for finance and technology companies. And our work spans inclusion in terms of how do you create inclusive cultures, how do you really help all your talent, all your team to thrive and reach their fullest potential. And a lot of that work involves trying to remove bias from systems and processes. And then on the diversity side, it's all about finding diverse leadership, executive talent, and that's diversity in its broadest sense. So the full demographic spectrum, but also cognitive diversity as well.
And where did the idea for the business come from? Because according to LinkedIn, the business has been around since September 2018. I dare say it was probably planned since before that date, but it'd just be interesting to know what the genesis was and what got you here.
Yeah, I think it sort of links more to my personal story to begin with. Spent some of my childhood in Africa, and so I'd lived, sort of in different cultural contexts. And then my mum was one of the first women to be ordained into the Church of England, which was a very long sort of feminist campaign, and the church was always behind on every level of diversity, it would seem. And then both of my parents came out as gay after having had 5 children. So they had a lovely marriage, but then decided they had another chapter of their lives to live. And so I feel like I experienced a lot of diversity and inclusion and exclusion in part of that story. And but then my own journey had been sort of going into investment banking, and then I started another search firm, which was purely on investment professionals for finance. But Equality Group is a weaving together of my personal story and my professional experience. And so it feels pretty meaningful and significant to be working on this and being able to partner with other leaders and firms that think you're really going to get the best performing team if you get the most diverse team and the most inclusive culture where they can effectively work together. You're going to see fantastic levels of innovation, creativity and resilience. And I think we need all 3 of those things even more than ever at this time.
Yeah, it's interesting that story about the Church of England. My dad is transgender and is a vicar. So I have experienced...
David. Oh, we've got so much we could talk about.
Yeah, we could go in a very different direction with this. Slamming the church. Well, not entirely.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I love the church on many levels. And I think sort of real... community level, support and facilitation. That's a wonderful element that the church brings. What it's lacking at times is a level of open-mindedness and inclusion and all the sort of good things that we see, and ultimately that there's a lot of teaching about, but there isn't always the practice. So yeah.
And the same is unfortunately true of many areas of society. I mean, it's interesting that you focused in on finance and technology in particular for Equality Group. Obviously, we're aware of the stats around technology, but with regards to finance, and this might be completely naive of me, I'd always imagined that finance was possibly slightly more diverse than tech because it can't really get much worse than it is in tech. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe at the leadership level, actually finance is just as bad as tech.
Yeah, sadly, both industries struggle a lot with diversity. So you're looking at about 15% of senior leadership levels with women in them. And it's even worse when you think about ethnic minorities. Only 1% of the asset management industry has a Black leader within it. And the stat I always think about, just for actually the state of diversity across industries, is that in the FTSE 100, you have more CEOs called Dave and Steve than you have women and ethnic minorities put together. And I think that just says a lot.
I always think to myself that when I got called David, my parents showed a complete lack of imagination.
They say Dave very specifically rather than David. So is there something about a David that calls himself Dave that?
Oh, it's awful, isn't it? It's interesting that you talked about the systems that people are using, because obviously we're now in a situation where we're all relying on technology and on systems, and new processes are being put in place, and new operating models are kind of being experimented and rolled out almost on a day-by-day basis as organizations try and work out what works for them. And I noticed on your website there is a section called Diversity Diaries, and you have got a guide to inclusive remote working. It'd be really interesting to know what examples you are seeing where people are beginning to build productive and positive teams despite the challenges, where we're not sat next to each other, we can't talk to each other, and communication is obviously more challenging.
Yeah, and I think you sort of focused in on one of the key points, which is around communication. And I think you're finding that some teams are communicating more than they used to. And when you can do that, that's bringing a healthy level of structure and idea sharing and collaboration. So I think communication is absolutely critical when you can't necessarily take for granted that you're going to see the people you need to see. And so those times to connect and share and brainstorm together have to be put in. And certainly as a team, we're doing that even more regularly than we used to. We've been remote working actually as a team since we started, but we've been recommending to clients that you over communicate, not under communicate at this time, and create opportunities for different types of communication. So not just a team check-in or the one-on-ones, but do the socials, do the informal times where other conversations and other ideas might come out. So I think, and using different mediums for check-ins, not just relying on one type of tool, but having that sort of fluidity of how conversations can emerge. So having your Slack or WhatsApp, having your video options, having some other, different formats that you're sharing together. So
yeah, because I can imagine to some users kind of those big Zoom chats where you've got kind of 30 faces on a gallery screen would be totally off-putting and really make people kind of reticent to kind of put forward good ideas or speak up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one way, probably one directional type of information share that's happening in those formats, and you need to try and create an opportunity that you're getting the more people sharing. I mean, one great idea that we've been trialing recently is something called Think Group, to try and counteract group think, which is obviously one of the areas we get a lot of bias and people just reinforcing the predominant ideas that typically comes from one segment of a company. And that is to get people anonymously sharing and inputting on a Google Doc or any other sort of shared collaborative tool on key areas or agendas, anything where sort of new ideas would be welcome, but where it might be hard to necessarily extract them in your typical, whatever, a video conference or in a town hall setting, is to actually send out that information in advance and get people to start inputting to it. And you don't know where that ideas come from, but you get the benefit of the cognitive diversity around it. And then that can be pulled out by the people that are actually having to make the decisions. So I think there'll be some interesting innovations that come out of this time about how you can harness all the power of your team using different types of tools. And really, I think it's actually the intention is so important. If the intention is that you want to hear everyone's ideas, then there's probably already tools to facilitate that. And I think that's where leadership is critical when it comes to inclusion and diversity. If the leadership care and they want it, there will be a way to get it. I think so often the disconnect is happening because there's not a significant enough buy-in at the leadership level.
So in this period, kind of more broader than just communication, what are the challenges that your clients rather are talking about and coming to you with and going, hey, this is something that we hadn't really anticipated?
I think a big challenge is around just everyone having very different home setups.
Mm.
And that, so often in these companies, people are, talk a little bit about their home setup, but they don't have to talk a lot about it. Your shared environment was the office, and now everyone's meeting everyone else in their homes, and there are very different demands that are made on people, and schools are closed, so children are in the home, or people might be caring for elderly relatives, or families have reunited to look after each other. So I think spending some time thinking about actually what does the working week look like for individual people, and allowing some fluidity and flexibility around that is really important. And that everyone's home working setup might not be the same either. And I've heard good examples of leaders saying, right, everyone needs a home working budget to get themselves up to speed, or allowing them to have taken some things home from the office that they might need to supplement, versus people being told to leave everything in the office and they're not allowed to take any equipment, and they sort of need to survive, pretty much on their own.
I suppose the other interesting point then would be to know what quick wins there are that you're able to put in place, I suppose, to make sure that the environment is as inclusive and diverse as it can be right now. Because I don't really know for sure, but I would imagine your usual suggestions are having to obviously be tailored for a slightly unusual environment.
Yeah, although I think a lot can be applied to this time. One of the main things we would say is about what you're actually looking to promote. When it comes to diversity and inclusion, I think people can often get stuck, and it's sort of understandable because it's often reported on in this way, on the negative side. So when it goes wrong, a harassment case, something hitting the press, that people have failed, that this is an area that you're going to be caught out on. And actually, it's much better if it can be reframed and looked on as a business opportunity, a strategic opportunity. So in this context, what are you trying to promote? What do you want? You want a more open-minded, regularly communicating, inclusive environment where people are able to bring themselves to work from their homes, share where they're struggling, have a forum for being able to do that, have mentorship and sponsorship continuing through this time, and those structures in place. So what are the things you're wanting to see happen? Because all the research shows that if you focus on what you want to promote, you're much more likely to get it. Whereas if you're focused on what you're trying to avoid, unfortunately, it's more likely that it will happen. The negative will happen. So it's always like, as I was saying, a simple intention setting, but from a strategic level, what do we want to see happen? And I think helping people to adopt more of a growth mindset at this time would also be extremely powerful. So there's a huge level of uncertainty. People don't have as much control over what's happening. So to view this period as a learning opportunity where we're not going to get everything right, something's going to go wrong, but we are going to be adapting and evolving, and that's positive in itself. And if we can do that together, we're going to come out of it sort of stronger and more resilient as a team. And so I think, again, reframing what's happening now, not as something that's just a complete roadblock and a negative thing that's going to damage productivity, but saying like, wow, we can actually evolve in new ways that we hadn't anticipated before. What are the opportunities that are available to us? What are the new connections we can make as a team, as individuals? And so I think that those are some of the quicker wins, but they're also like quite big reframing conversations that need to be happening at a wider organizational level. So it's whether those conversations are happening or not. When I see them happening and being framed in the right way, actually, it's been remarkable hearing the way some firms' cultures, I think, are going to significantly change this period for the better.
Just on that point, as a kind of a follow-on thought, I mean, you're talking about reframing and culture changing. But going into this, we probably had a fairly clear idea of what minority groups existed in society. But I suppose in these circumstances, that might shift. Whilst the minority groups we're aware of and socio-demographics who don't have as secure access to the internet, etc., we're kind of aware of, I suppose there might be new vulnerable groups where coming into a shared office was a safe place that they could work, but now they're at home, and it's not even so much that they don't have a home set up. They are just in difficult working situations. Maybe they're living with people that they don't know particularly well, or they're far from home, and therefore their mental situation or their mental health rather could be affected by it. Is that something that organisations are actively being a little bit more aware of?
Yeah, I think they are. It's something that we cover in the guide as well about mental health and well-being and the importance of really paying attention to that and thinking that through for your team, providing resources, encouraging meditation, good boundaries and time management on the days that people, self-care is so important at these times. And you're thinking about who could actually be lonely in your team because they are going to be more isolated than others if they don't have a family nearby or in the home with them. So I think it's spending the time really understanding individual needs and differences. And again, that's coming out of conversations and communication and making the time for that and prioritizing that, because if you do it, you're going to get the benefits of this more inclusive, connected working environment. And that will stand the test of time. That will continue out of this current period.
Looking to the future, what are the plans for Equality Group, for the Equality Group? Because right now, I suppose you've had to completely rethink what your goals and aims are for this year, because everybody's business plans have been thrown up into the air.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we've got some great ongoing client work, but I think what we're really thinking about is the need for more inclusive leadership at a time like this. I think when you look at how this crisis is being navigated by different countries, it's very notable to see which countries are actually coming out of this almost and have managed it well. There's a lot of female leaders in place in those countries, whether it's Angela Merkel in Germany,
Jacinda
Ardern in New Zealand. And I think the way that they've gone about it, they've been very decisive, they've communicated well, they've been very collaborative, they've spoken to every part of society, and they inspire hope, not fear. It's not just about it being men versus women. We need more women in leadership. It's about having the feminine traits and qualities that mean you collaborate, that you nurture, that you're actually trying to bring the best out in people at times like this, that we need to see more of, not just globally for political leaders, but for leadership within business and especially within finance and technology. That's going to help our industries recover and come out stronger if we see more of that type of leadership at this time. So that's a big focus for what we're doing at Equality Group.
Well, let's hope that people take that positive message to heart. Thank you for your time today. And fingers crossed, we are more positive about this and we're out of the whole situation sooner rather than later.